At 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 1944, a German armored scout car rolls out of the fog outside Cassino, Italy. It moves at 15 miles an hour, unhurried, confident, the way a predator moves when it knows nothing can hurt it. Corporal James "Jimmy" Dalton is crouched in a muddy ditch 30 yards away, his boots soaked through, his hands wrapped around a shovel handle that isn't supposed to matter. There are no bazookas nearby, no mines, no grenades, nothing listed in the field manual under approved methods for disabling light armor. There are 16 of those methods. Dalton has none of them. What he does have is a length of rusted barbed wire stretched tight across the road at exactly 14 inches off the ground, axle height for a German Staccaefs. Day 2 on 22, a measurement he learned by crawling around the wreck of one 2 weeks earlier, counting inches with his fingers while flies gathered on the dead. Every officer in the 34th Infantry Division has forbidden this. Unauthorized field modifications. Risk to friendly personnel. Court-martial offense. Dalton pulls the wire taut and waits. The fog clings to the Leary Valley like wet cotton. Sound carries strangely in it, muted, distorted. Then he hears the engine. A straight 6 grinding through the gears, the distinctive whine of a German scout car doing what it has done here every morning and every evening for weeks. They come, they look, they call artillery. Americans die 12 hours later. Dalton has watched it happen. Private Eddie Kowalski, February 18th, shot through the chest when his rifle rounds sparked uselessly off armor. 20 years old. Pittsburgh, Sergeant Mike Brennan, February 23rd, missed with a grenade, caught by a 20-millimeter autocannon. 24. Brooklyn, Corporal Luis Vargas, March 4th, machine-gunned while running for cover. El Paso, always shared his cigarettes. 47 men in 6 weeks. Not battles, not assaults, reconnaissance. That's what finally breaks something in Dalton. He grew up in Gary, Indiana, where his father worked 15-hour shifts in the blast furnaces at U.S. Steel, where metal failed if you didn't understand it, where a loose coupling could derail 6 cars and a frayed cable could kill a brakeman. The rail yards taught him to think in systems, to see where force traveled, where it concentrated, where it broke. You learned to fix problems with wire and scrap because nobody was going to buy you new parts. The Army promised Dalton training and structure when he enlisted in January 1943. What it gave him was 8 weeks of basic, a rifle he barely knew, and a front-row seat to a problem nobody up the chain seemed able to solve. German scout cars were killing Americans because doctrine assumed equipment that didn't exist. Dalton told his captain, "What if we strung wire across the road?" he asked. "Low, tight, catch the axle." The answer was immediate. No, unauthorized, dismissed. So Dalton waited, and then he stopped waiting. 2 nights earlier, another scout car had rolled through at dusk. 2 more men dead, Privates Chen and Harrison, one from San Francisco, one from Oklahoma. Dalton helped carry their bodies back through the mud. That night, he made a decision that would end his career if it failed. At midnight, he took a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump, 30 feet, rusted but strong. 2 entrenching tools, standard issue folding shovels every soldier carried, nothing exotic, nothing traceable. The road lay 400 yards out, running parallel to the American lines. Predictable, covered by trees, narrowed by 2 oak trunks where vehicles naturally funneled through. Perfect. Dalton drove the first shovel into the mud on the left side, angling it back toward friendly lines. 6 inches wasn't enough. He hammered it deeper with a rock until it bit at 12. The second shovel went in 18 feet across the road. He measured by pacing, the way his father had taught him. Then the wire. 3 tight loops around the first handle, hands slick with mud and blood as the barbs bit into his palms. He stretched it across at 14 inches, not ankle height, not waist height, exactly where the front axle would meet it at speed. 3 loops on the far shovel. He tested the tension. 2 loose, and it would snap. 2 tight, and it would shear. He adjusted until the wire hummed when plucked. A low metallic note that vibrated through the shovel handles and into the ground. He buried it under a thin skin of mud, just enough to disappear in low light. The shovels already looked abandoned, rusted, ordinary. The entire setup took 23 minutes. Dalton lay in the ditch afterward, breathing hard, listening to distant artillery rumble like a storm that never ended. If a patrol came now, he'd run. If an officer found it, he'd face charges. If it worked, maybe fewer names to remember. At 1:15 a.m., he crawled back to his foxhole and said nothing. Now, at 6:47 a.m., the scout car emerges from the fog. 600 yards. Gray paint. Commander's hatch open. The gunner traverses the 20-millimeter cannon lazily, more habit than caution. They aren't expecting resistance. They never are. 500 yards. Dalton's hands shake. Not fear. Anger, compressed and held too long. 400. He thinks of Vargas, Brennan, Kowalski. 200 yards. The car accelerates slightly, eager to clear the area. 50 yards. Dalton fixes his eyes on the front wheels, mud-caked, spinning fast. The wire catches the right axle. The effect is immediate and violent. The wheel locks. The axle seizes. Momentum takes over. At 15 miles an hour, the scout car becomes a lever. The nose pitches down, the rear lifts, and the vehicle goes vertical before anyone inside understands what's happening. It rolls once, twice, 3 times. Metal tears. Mud explodes. The car comes to rest upside down, engine still screaming, wheels spinning uselessly in the air. For half a second, the valley is silent. Then Dalton is moving. He grabs his M1 and runs toward the wreck, yelling for covering fire. Other soldiers surge out of their positions, rifles up, disbelief on their faces. The commander lies broken on the road, neck snapped. The gunner is trapped under the turret, unconscious. The driver crawls out through the shattered windscreen, dazed, 22 years old, hands rising without being told. Dalton reaches the wreckage first. He pulls the driver clear, shoves him toward the rear. Then he sees it, the wire still wrapped around the axle, the shovel handles dragged 20 feet, but unbroken. It worked. Dalton tears the wire free, coils it fast, and stuffs it into his pack before anyone can ask the wrong question. 6 minutes later, Captain Morrison arrives. He walks around the overturned scout car slowly, searching for what should be there. Mines, blast marks, bazooka strikes. There are none. Scout cars don't just flip, Morrison says. Dalton meets his eyes, face blank, breathing steady. Yes, sir. Morrison studies him for a long moment, then looks back at the wreck. The German is captured. The threat is gone. No Americans are dead this morning. Get photographs, Morrison says finally. File a report. He doesn't ask another question, and just like that, a forbidden idea survives its first test. Not because it was approved, but because it worked. By noon, everyone in the company knows. No one says Dalton's name out loud, but they don't have to. Soldiers don't need paperwork to understand cause and effect. They have eyes. They have ears. They have the memory of a German scout car upside down in the mud where it had ruled uncontested for weeks. That afternoon, another patrol is reported moving along the same road. Dalton is not ordered to do anything. He does it anyway. This time, he doesn't work alone. 2 men from 2nd Platoon bring wire without being asked. Another digs the ditch deeper, faster, hands moving with the urgency of people who understand the clock is ticking. Nobody talks about permission. Nobody talks about consequences. They talk about axle height. 14 inches, not 13, not 15. They tension the wire carefully, anchoring it to shovels driven into ground so hard it rings when struck. They bury it just enough to disappear, leaving the road looking untouched. Then they melt back into the tree line and wait. The second scout car hits at 4:12 p.m. It doesn't flip as cleanly as the first. The driver brakes at the last second, sensing something wrong. The axle still catches. The vehicle slews sideways, rolls once, and slams into a tree hard enough to shear the turret ring. The fight that follows is short and ugly. 2 Germans are killed. 1 is wounded. 1 surrenders screaming. No Americans die. That night, Dalton hears the sound he hasn't heard in weeks. Laughter. Quiet, tired laughter carried down the line as men pass cigarettes and trade looks that say the same thing. We don't have to die like that anymore. Captain Morrison files his report. He describes an overturned enemy scout car. He lists casualties. He notes improved defensive posture. He does not describe how it happened. Morrison is not a coward. He is not a genius. He is a company commander in Italy in 1944, responsible for 160 men with limited weapons, unreliable supply, and an enemy who learns quickly. He understands something important. If this goes up the chain the wrong way, Dalton will be court-martialed. The wire traps will be banned explicitly, and the scout cars will come back. So Morrison chooses a third option. He lets the idea spread sideways. Within a week, other companies along the sector start losing fewer men to reconnaissance. Nobody issues an order. Nobody circulates a memo. The method moves the way practical knowledge always does in war, through whispers, borrowed tools, and demonstrations conducted just out of sight. A corporal from 3rd Platoon shows another unit how to set the wire. A sergeant forgets to ask where the shovels went. A lieutenant looks at an overturned German vehicle and decides not to inspect too closely. The Germans notice. Lieutenant Klaus Richter commands reconnaissance elements attached to the 90th Panzergrenadier Division. He has been running patrols along the casino approaches for months, cataloging American positions with methodical efficiency. In late March, his reports begin to change tone. Vehicles fail to return. Drivers report sudden loss of control. Roads once safe now produce casualties. Richter examines a recovered scout car himself. He crouches in the mud, tracing scratches along the axle housing. He finds bent metal, twisted steel, marks that do not belong to mines or explosives. Wire. He orders his men to slow down, to send infantry ahead of vehicles, to probe roads cautiously. The tempo breaks. German reconnaissance loses its rhythm. What was once routine becomes dangerous, unpredictable. Patrols take longer. Information arrives late. Artillery fire grows less accurate. The Americans feel it first, not as victory, but as relief. Fewer shells fall. Fewer ambushes succeed. More nights pass without bodies being carried back through the mud. Dalton does not receive a medal. He receives something else. Silence. No reprimand arrives. No commendation. His name never appears in an after-action report. He continues to string wire at night, hands wrapped in cloth to keep from bleeding too much. He teaches others quietly, always emphasizing the same thing. Measure, tension, hide. One mistake, and it won't work. The method evolves. Some units add trip flares. Others angle the wire slightly to improve rollover. A few experiment and fail, wire snapping, vehicles breaking through, Germans adapting. This is how real innovation happens in war. Messy, unauthorized, paid for in blood until it isn't. By April, German scout cars no longer roam freely near Cassino. They keep their distance. Reconnaissance shifts to foot patrols and distant observation. The wire traps do not win the battle for Italy, but they change the price. And in war, changing the price changes behavior. Dalton understands that he has crossed a line he cannot uncross. If the wire fails one day and Americans die because of it, the blame will land on him. Not the doctrine, not the manuals, him. He accepts that because he has already watched too many men die for rules written somewhere far from this mud. By May of 1944, the fog around Cassino no longer belongs only to the valley. It belongs to everyone. German reconnaissance patrols slow to a crawl. Scout cars stop short of roads they once used daily. Infantry probes move cautiously, bayonets down, eyes on the ground instead of the horizon. Artillery fire becomes less precise, arriving late or not at all. From the American side, it feels like the war has taken a shallow breath. Not victory, just less dying. The wire does not appear in any manual. It is never named. It is never officially adopted. But it is there, quietly, persistently, across multiple sectors. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it fails. Sometimes it only slows a vehicle long enough for rifle fire to do the rest. Sometimes a German driver sees it in time. And that, too, is success. Because hesitation is a weapon. Lieutenant Klaus Richter writes in his field notes that American defensive behavior has changed character. He cannot quite explain how. There are fewer ambushes sprung by surprise, fewer clean reconnaissance runs. Roads feel watched even when nothing is visible. He recommends alternate routes, additional infantry support, more time the Germans do not have. Back on the American side, Captain Morrison receives a quiet visit from battalion staff. Questions are asked, not about wire, but about results. Why losses are down. Why German probing has eased. Morrison answers carefully, truthfully, and incompletely. He talks about vigilance, about discipline, about men learning the ground. No one presses him, because the reports look better, and because wars are not won by exposing uncomfortable truths when the numbers finally start to move in the right direction. Dalton keeps his head down. He strings wire until his hands are permanently scarred. He stops counting how many vehicles the method disables. He stops remembering names because memory is heavy and the war is not finished with him yet. When Cassino finally falls, it is not because of wire or shovels or clever tricks. It falls to artillery, armor, air power, and attrition, the official forces of modern war. Dalton's contribution does not appear in the histories. After the campaign, he rotates out. No medal, no citation, no mention, just another corporal returning home thinner than he left, carrying habits that do not fit civilian life very well. The Army never prosecutes him. It also never thanks him. Years later, revised field manuals quietly include sections on improvised obstacles, on mechanical vulnerabilities, on exploiting axle height and momentum when proper anti-armor weapons are unavailable. No names are attached. Doctrine absorbs the lesson without acknowledging its teacher. That is how institutions survive. The wire rusts away. The shovels are reused. The road is bombed and rebuilt. What remains is the uncomfortable truth Dalton lived with from the moment he pulled the wire tight across that road in the fog. That sometimes obedience kills faster than the enemy. That innovation is often indistinguishable from insubordination until it works. And that the men who change wars at the lowest levels are rarely allowed to be remembered, because remembering them would mean admitting the rules were wrong. At Cassino, a German scout car learned that lesson first. The Army learned it later, quietly.